Hello everybody, Volen here in Pursuit of Art. In the next 3 videos, I'm going to walk you through the process of rendering this 3D photoreal looking object that you're going to see behind me right now. So it's planar surfaces. This is aimed at beginners, so people starting out, struggling with values, or not being sure how to actually put that realism in your work. These videos are going to be for you. Now, I initially had one video planned only, but it ballooned to over 40 minutes. Now I split it into two, plus an additional bonus one. So the videos are gonna be, this first one I'm gonna guide you through the setup process. So this is gonna discuss layering, the process, the sketching, which part is good for what, how I decided to actually construct the shape, the thinking behind it, explaining how people often oversimplify problems and just dive right into them as opposed to thinking about it. Pretty much almost like playing chess. I like to have that analogy of that you need to spend time to think about what your next move is going to be, how it's going to develop later on, then commit and get started, but then you can still make adjustments as you go. So the thinking behind this whole thing, easily for me, probably the most important video is this one, just because you actually get to see the thinking behind it. Second video is going to be the actual rendering, so it's going to be a sped up process of me going through this entire study, just basically from start to finish. So it's going to go from absolutely nothing, blank canvas, to this object that you see on the right now. So we're going to go through that in the second video. Then the third one, since the second one is sped up, explaining how things go together, etc. Third one is going to be, I'm going to demo some of the actual shading process for you. So I'm going to slow it down. It's not just the video slowed down. I'm going to be redoing this again. So I'm going to be explaining how I get those gradations in there. Once the values are established, once the shapes are in place, how do you get that realism in there through gradations, through those value transitions? So I'm going to be showing you the process that I use for that. Those are going to be the 3 videos. I hope you enjoy them. Each one shows the process in a different way, so I highly encourage you to watch all 3 of them, and then maybe at the end return to this first one and just understand the process better. This will help you with any other planar form that you have to render, and it's guiding you through the process of how to get that realistic finish in your work. Okay, let's get started. Hello everybody, Volen here in Pursuit of Art. I thought today we might do a little exercise together. We've been doing kind of few sort of theory-oriented lessons over the last few weeks, so I thought maybe today we might do an exercise and just see what all that stuff looks like in practice. I don't want you to walk away with these of just thinking, okay, I got another piece of information. I have another thing in my head that I'm not kind of sure how to use yet. I want you to look at these as almost like martial arts practice. There's no point at all in having information without the actual use of it. So I want to today just put some of those things we've been talking about before and see how they would all play out. And this is going to be the demo we're going to use. It's going to be that little geoform that you see on screen over there. Left one is the render from the 3D program, left one being here, and this is the one that we'll be rendering. A couple of notes about how we're going to approach this whole thing is, first we're going to start with observation. So we're going to have a couple minutes to just look at what we're going to do. Think about what it is the goal, the outcome is of this thing. Think about how we're going to achieve it. What tools are we going to use? How are we going to align our tools to our destination, to where we need to get to? So we're going to have, basically, we're going to do what we've been talking about over the last few weeks. All of those different things of being aware of what you're doing, the meaning behind the values, all of those we're going to put into practice. I also want you to be aware of what's not being said. So I've recorded a video already that I'll probably post some point in the future that talks about how a lot of the things that you're going to do, a lot of tutorials you're going to watch, a lot of demos, a lot of courses that you're going to see, a lot of those people are going to talk about what's on their mind at the moment. They will probably not cover what's the most intriguing thing to you, because either at their stage of development, they might have forgotten what it is that you're thinking of right now, like one of those little variables that to you is crucial to understand in order to improve. To them, it might be something that at this point has almost become mundane. So I encourage you to look at not only to listen to not only to what's being said, but also pay attention to what I'm actually gonna not say, just because I probably can think to say it at that moment. So I might be emphasizing things that are actually not as important to you as some of the things that you may see that are more important to you. Like for instance, I might, because it's a value demo, I might just talk about what values I'm going to use, how to put them there, and then that's it. But I might not mention, let's say, that the rendering technique that I'm going to use is I might use a brush that's a couple times larger than any area that I'm going to cover. And I call that sneaking up on the value. So using a very, very large brush to be able to shade or render an object with a very soft gradation. It's sneaking up on the value. It's using a very soft transition, basically. I'm gonna try and use a method that doesn't really, because of the actual object, I'm gonna try to align all my tools to be conducive to me producing that effect. So I'm not gonna use a small brush at any point because there's no, let's say, small texture anywhere. I'm not gonna try and use a textured, weird brush. So a lot of people, when they first have a problem, they would go through this entire huge list of which brush do I use, and then they get started. It's only going to be just one, very simple, as basic as possible, but hopefully effective. So just keep an eye out on what I'm actually not going to say, on what are those things that you can just gain from just the technique. Another thing you can do is you can just shut me up and just put it on mute, turn the sound off, and just watch the actual rendering and see what you can get from that. And also, the best thing that you could possibly do for me is that you can give me some comments and let me know what was clear, what was unclear, so then I can know and make some more videos for you. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is just the value structure and what it tells us about the image. So this is going to be our lightest light. Over here, we're going to have our darkest plane on the actual object. Darkest darks somewhere over here, plus over here really. So cast shadows are going to be the darkest. And what's that telling me so far is that the light source is perpendicular to this plane. So it's probably somewhere here on the left and high above. So somewhere above and to the left. And I'm just gonna put it over here somewhere, as you can imagine, like a rectangle sort of, that's just beaming light rays down. So it's sort of oriented like this. This is its top part. So it's shooting light rays from this direction. They're hitting this plane first. This one is still oriented in the same direction, but it is facing downward. So if you think about what this actually looks like from the side view, it's gonna be something like, trying to find where my canvas ends, it's gonna be like this. So this one receives a lot of light, this one receives less, but it's still oriented in the same direction. Whereas a plane like this one is facing in a completely opposite direction, and there's also no bounce light. So because of its darkness, and because of the darkness over here, I can estimate that there is no secondary light source or no plane or nothing else that's bouncing light back. So these planes are just not receiving any more light apart from what's happening here in the scene, just bouncing from either the floor or from another plane. So this plane is illuminated by this one. This floor plane is being illuminated from here, but this one, which is still a floor plane and just as close to the floor as this one, isn't actually receiving almost any light because it's only the cast shadow in front of it. So it's not receiving anything. I find all this stuff really interesting. I hope you guys do too. Just thinking about what's going on in the image and not just copying it, but really being able to understand what's going on. Because once you do, you can then build more on top of this thing. You can add more segments to it, you could add more objects, etc. But it all begins with this understanding. So this is our light structure. Now, in terms of just reproducing this in 2D, which is what we've been talking about over the last few weeks, just being able to produce a good study of this thing. What we need to do is first we need to determine what are those values that we're going to have to reproduce here. So what are those tones exactly? And we had this value scale that we talked about last time. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen the previous videos on values, have a look at them and just find out more about these things if you don't know about them. It's going to be our value scale. And we're going to number basically each and every value that we need to put on here. Again, you can see this in the last video where I showed a few different studies that I've done over quite a long period of time to just learn about values. So we need to find and match each and every one of those to one of the values on the value scale, then translate them over to our object, and we're going to get a pretty good visual estimate of that same object. So we're going to be able to recreate this pretty accurately if we're just able to reproduce those values. So looking at these, I'm going to try and establish first where my 50% gray is, so my midtone. I've already seen where my lightest light is. I've seen where my darkest darks are, and this is going to be, looking at the value scale, this is probably going to be either here or here. So it looks pretty close to this. But one thing I'm actually going to show you right now is that looking at the value scale, you need to be kind of careful of where you put it. It's because if I put it here in the dark, so if this is in a dark area and I'm trying to judge a value that's surrounded by other values, I'm actually going to be thrown off. So this shape right here looks as if it's probably around this value over here. So if I just check them right now, this is 45, and it looks like, did I say this one? So this one looks like it's a bit bright. I would probably say that it's roughly around this one. Like these two seem to be a good match. But what happens is, because my value scale is on dark, so it's surrounded by darkness, it actually appears like it's a bit lighter. So just a sort of warning, if I turn on both images, so there's a lot of value going on around everywhere and there's just darkness over here, I think it's really easy to be, I would definitely pick this one, I think, for the middle. So if I just check them again, this is a 4, but the actual value is a 5. So you can be, this is a whole topic on its own really, about simultaneous contrast and all this stuff, but it's just your perceptual system and how it works is you're going to be fighting a lot of these inbuilt brain perceptual activities that are going on that are preventing you from seeing things accurately. So just being aware that there are things happening that we're going to talk about later on to not inflate the video, and knowing that because of that, this stuff isn't really simple, because you're going to be fighting your brain almost all the time until you get it to be used to the fact that there are these things happening and that you need to sort of account for those as well, that your brain isn't going to see stuff properly or isn't going to give you access to the information that you need. Okay, let's start assigning our numbers now. And again, if this makes no sense, just go back to the previous video and then you'll be able to follow along. So we're going to try and find out which value matches which, and these all have numbers. So this is going to be a 0, this is going to be a 10, and then we're just going to assign the numbers in between to every single plane. So this one I'm going to go for, I think it's probably going to be a 9, to be honest, so it doesn't seem as bright as this, so I'm going to call this a 9, and then we're going to check ourselves and see how close we are. This is going to be a 9. I'm going to call this my 5, so this is going to be my 5 over here. So this is right in between light and dark. So this, having this plane as a 5, I'm then able to judge better what other planes are like. So this is going to be, if we just split these right here, everything that's in shade is probably going to be around here. Everything that's in the light is going to be around here. So I have these two planes. I only have a choice in between those 4 or 5 over here. So it just really simplifies the process for me of assigning those numbers. Is I split everything, and then shadow is going to be the darker ones here on the left, light is going to be on the right side. So this one is probably going to be roughly around maybe a 7. I don't care if I'm right or wrong very much, because I can, once I put these into my study, I can then look at them and then, okay, this needs to be a bit lighter, this needs to be a bit darker. I can balance them out. But it's just a good test for you to be able to assign these and train your observation. This one is a bit darker than this one. I'm going to go for, let's say, a 6. It might be closer, but I'm just going to keep them separate. This one is going to be tricky, I would say, probably somewhere in between those two. So we're going to call it a, what's that, a 2.25, let's say, 2.5. This is going to be this is a bit darker, so let's say this is a 2. This is going to be a 1 or a 0, so it could be like, it's going to be fading off even more. So this is going to be a 0, so complete black over here. This is going to have a little bit, so it's going to be like 0.7 or something. This is going to be another 6 maybe, and this is somewhere in between, slightly darker than my 5, so about a 4. So what I'm doing here is I'm just assigning a value to each and every plane. Once I have those, then when I start building my actual object over here, I know much better when I go into Photoshop over here, and then I can just go, okay, this is going to be a 5, so I'm just going to grab my 50% gray. This is going to be a 2, I'm going to hop over to 20% and just block that in and see how it works. I've said this is a 4, so I'm just going to hop over to my 4, grab that, put it in place, see how that works. Might be a bit too light, in which case I just lower it down. Having an idea of that value scale is going to assure that I'm going to have a realistic object in the end of this thing, because matching the values is what's going to give you that realism. Okay, this was the observation part. What's now the actual tool part? how am I going to produce this thing? What am I going to do in terms of layers? So first of all, this thing, how am I going to put all those different things together? How am I going to make sure that I'm going to do this as fast and as easy as possible? And also, what tools am I going to use that are going to be productive for this type of shape? So for instance, this is a mechanical object. This has very finely cut lines. So if I decide to do this by hand, I'm going to be probably in a lot of trouble because I'm going to be missing out those machined edges. I'm going to have to go over multiple times to get it correct, etc. I want to pick tools that are reflective of the object that I'm using, meaning they're going to be aligned with how the object was made. So if it's mechanical, I want to use mechanical means. And for you that may not have seen this, people that do traditional stuff, they use paper masks. So instead of using like a Photoshop layer that's just locked, you could use a paper mask, which is just the actual shape of the thing with a little piece cut out, and then you just put your graphite in there. So there's ways to do this stuff mechanically, whether you do it traditionally or you do it digitally, like how we're gonna do it. So first I start with my sketch. You're gonna see this in action in just a little bit. So I start with my sketch. It's deliberately not the same. I don't care if it's exactly the same because it's a value study. And I also want to show you that just tiny differences are going to make a difference in what the actual object looks like, because mine is sort of rotated a bit more towards the right. That's what it seems like because of how I've distorted it. But at this point, it doesn't matter because I'm interested in the values. So for you that might be beating yourself up about, oh, it's not the right shape and the value is off, just worry about the value, or just worry about the accuracy if that's what you want to practice first. But don't beat yourself up about everything. Do beat yourself up from time to time, just for good measure, so you don't slack off. But make sure that you're actually doing it for the right reason. So we need to think about how we're going to layer this thing. So we're going to use mechanical means to render it. We're going to use lasso tool to outline all the different shapes. We're going to use layers to be able to lock them and adjust our different values, so to make it easier for us to control our lightness and our darkness. And another thing I have to think about is just how to layer all these things. So what I decided I would do is I'm going to make a base layer for this entire shape. So then if I do end up, let's say, missing a crease somewhere, so if I make a hole in between two shapes, I'm able to go underneath this whole thing because it's on its own layer and I can just darken it there. So I'm trying to make this as flexible and as productive for me as possible. So I'm going to show you how this thing was built up, then I'm going to play the video for you. So this is my sketch, and here we go. First is just some tone for the ground plane, some cast shadow. You can see it's completely horrible underneath the object, but that doesn't matter because it's hidden by all this beauty. Then if I just turn off the sketch now, the sketch just served for me to be able to put those shapes in there. After that, these are all my layers. This is how it starts. It's just this base shape under there, and each and every one of these is just added on top to be able to make that whole shape. I'm not going to explain it, I'm going to show you the video instead.